Billionaire checked his old house cameras furious and froze when he saw his ex-wife with a newborn. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from, and once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The glass conference room on the 42nd floor overlooked downtown Seattle like a throne room surveying its kingdom. Keaton Wilder sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, his steel gray eyes focused on the holographic projections dancing across the smart glass. Numbers, charts, profit margins. The language he spoke fluently at 33. His dark hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place despite the 12-hour workday that had already stretched behind him. The charcoal Tom Ford suit fit his athletic frame like it was sculpted for him, and probably was. Every detail about Keaton Wilder screamed precision, control, success. The renewable energy sector in Southeast Asia shows a 23% growth trajectory, his lead analyst Thompson was saying through the video feed from their Bangkok office. If we move quickly on the Indonesian solar farm project, we're looking at a potential $800 million revenue stream within 18 months. Keaton nodded, his fingers drumming silently against the table. His company, Wilder Sustainable Technologies, had grown from a small startup in his garage to a multi-billion-dollar empire in just 5 years. Clean energy, smart grids, revolutionary battery technology. He had his hands in every aspect of the green revolution. What about the regulatory hurdles? Keaton's voice was deep, measured, the kind of voice that commanded attention in boardrooms around the world. Minister Hartono is optimistic. We have a preliminary meeting scheduled for... The soft chime of his phone interrupted Thompson mid-sentence. Keaton glanced at the screen, expecting another urgent message from his assistant or perhaps the mayor's office about the wind farm project in Oregon. Instead, he saw something that made his blood freeze. Security alert. Motion detected. Mercer Island residence. His finger hovered over the notification. The Mercer Island house. The house he hadn't set foot in for 7 months. The house where she still lived. Mr. Wilder? Thompson's voice seemed to come from underwater. Sir, should we proceed with the timeline discussion? Keaton's thumb moved almost of its own accord, tapping the alert. The security app opened, showing a grid of camera feeds from various angles of the sprawling craftsman-style home. His home. Their home. Her home now. The living room camera caught his attention first. There, sitting on the cream-colored sectional sofa they had picked out together 3 years ago, was Rowena, his ex-wife. She looked different. Thinner, maybe. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she was wearing a soft blue sweater he didn't recognize. But it was what she was holding that made Keaton's world tilt on its axis. A baby. Tiny. Wrapped in a white blanket. Cradled against her chest with the tender care of someone who had been doing it for days, maybe weeks. The conference room around him seemed to fade into white noise. Thompson was still talking. His colleagues were nodding and taking notes. But Keaton couldn't process any of it. His eyes were locked on the screen, on the impossible scene playing out in the house he had walked away from. Rowena was rocking gently, her lips moving as if she was singing a lullaby. The baby, he could barely make out its features, but something deep in his chest was already screaming the truth he didn't want to acknowledge. Sir? Thompson's voice was sharper now. Mr. Wilder, can you hear me? Keaton stood abruptly, his chair rolling backward with enough force to hit the glass wall behind him. 6 pairs of eyes turned to him, concern and confusion written across their faces. Cancel everything, he said, his voice hoarse. Cancel every meeting for the rest of the day, maybe the rest of the week. But sir, the Indonesian project, I said cancel everything. Keaton was already moving toward the door, loosening his tie as he walked. Have my driver bring the car around. Now. He didn't wait for responses. He was already in the elevator, watching the numbers count down as his heart hammered against his ribs. 7 months. The baby looked newborn, maybe a week old at most. The math was simple, devastating, undeniable. As the elevator descended toward the parking garage, Keaton stared at his reflection in the polished steel doors. The man looking back at him was still the billionaire CEO who commanded respect in every room he entered. But underneath the expensive suit and perfect exterior, he felt like he was falling apart. He had built an empire. He had everything he had ever wanted. So why did he feel like he had just lost everything that actually mattered? What would you do if you discovered you had a child you never knew existed? Would the success you worked so hard for still feel worth it? The Tesla Model S cut through Seattle traffic like a knife through silk. But for once, Keaton wasn't paying attention to the seamless acceleration or the envious glances from other drivers. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. 7 months. 7 months since he had driven this route to Mercer Island. 7 months since he had packed his belongings into 3 suitcases and walked out of the life they had built together. The afternoon sun glinted off Lake Washington as he crossed the floating bridge, the same view that used to calm him after brutal days in the office. Now it just reminded him of all the evenings he had missed, all the dinners that had grown cold while he stayed late for one more call, one more deal, one more step toward the empire that had cost him everything. His phone buzzed incessantly on the passenger seat. Thompson calling back probably. His assistant. The mayor's office. A dozen urgent matters that had seemed critically important an hour ago and now felt like background noise. Keaton's mind kept returning to the image on the security feed. Rowena looking so natural with the baby in her arms, like she had been born to be a mother. He had always known she wanted children. She had made that clear from early in their relationship, but he had convinced himself they needed to wait. Build the company first. Establish financial security. Create the perfect foundation. Perfect. He laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in the quiet car. What was perfect about a father who worked 18-hour days? What was perfect about a husband who missed anniversary dinners for board meetings in Singapore? The GPS announced his turn onto the tree-lined street that led to her, neighborhood. Massive homes sat back from the road, hidden behind gates and perfectly manicured lawns. This was where Seattle's elite lived, where tech moguls and old money families maintained their pristine facades. As he pulled into the circular driveway of the Craftsman home, memories crashed over him like a wave. Rowena laughing as they toured the house for the first time, her hands gesturing excitedly as she described where they would put the Christmas tree, how they would convert the 3rd bedroom into a nursery someday. She had seen their future in every room. He had seen square footage and property values. Keaton sat in the car for a long moment, engine off, staring at the front door they had painted sage green because Rowena said it reminded her of her grandmother's house in Oregon, a house where she had been happy as a child, where family meant something more than conference calls and profit margins. Through the large front windows he could see warm light spilling from the living room. It looked like home. It had never looked like home when he lived here, just another beautiful space he occasionally slept in between trips to New York, London, Tokyo. His phone buzzed again. This time it was his assistant, Margaret. "Mr. Wilder, I have the Indonesian minister's office holding on line 2, and the Times wants a comment on the renewable energy bill that just passed committee. Should I reschedule your 4 o'clock with the venture capital group from Silicon Valley? Cancel everything, Margaret." "I told you." "Yes, sir, but the Indonesian project deadline is tomorrow, and if we don't respond to the minister by, then let it go." The words felt foreign in his mouth. Keaton Wilder didn't let billion-dollar deals slip away because of personal matters. He compartmentalized. He prioritized. He won. Except he was starting to realize that winning in business might mean losing at everything else. "Sir, I don't understand. This is the largest sustainable energy contract in Southeast Asian history. If we walk away now, Margaret, I have to go." He ended the call and turned off the phone entirely. In 5 years of running WST, he had never gone completely dark. His board would panic. His investors would demand answers. The business press would speculate about everything from hostile takeovers to health crises. But right now, none of that mattered. Keaton stepped out of the car and walked slowly toward the front door. His key still worked. Rowena had never changed the locks, despite his lawyer's recommendations during the divorce proceedings. She had been surprisingly gracious about everything, actually. No demands for alimony beyond what he insisted on providing. No fights over assets. No vindictive social media posts or interviews with business magazines. She had simply signed the papers and wished him well. At the time, he had been grateful for her maturity. Now he wondered if her calm acceptance had been a sign that she was already moving on, already building a life that didn't include him, already carrying his child and deciding he didn't deserve to know. His hand was on the doorknob when he heard it, a soft sound from inside, a baby's cry, quickly hushed by Rowena's gentle voice. He could hear her murmuring something, probably a lullaby or just soothing words. For the first time in 7 months, Keaton Wilder, master of the universe, was afraid to open a door. The door opened before he could turn the handle. Rowena stood in the doorway, and for a moment, Time seemed to fold in on itself. She looked exactly as he remembered. Those warm hazel eyes that had first captured his attention in a crowded coffee shop 5 years ago. The delicate curve of her jaw, the way she tilted her head slightly when she was thinking. But there were new lines around her eyes, a weariness that hadn't been there before. She was wearing soft gray leggings and an oversized cream sweater that made her look smaller, more fragile than the confident woman who used to challenge his business decisions over breakfast. Her auburn hair was longer now, falling in loose waves past her shoulders instead of the sleek bob she had worn during their marriage. "You still use the cameras?" she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Keaton's mouth felt dry. "Rowena, I figured you'd come eventually." She stepped back from the doorway, not quite an invitation but not blocking his path either, though I thought it might take you longer to notice. He stepped inside, his eyes immediately drawn to the living room where he had seen her on the security feed. The baby wasn't visible now, probably sleeping upstairs. Everything else looked exactly the same. The same furniture they had chosen together, the same artwork on the walls, the same throw pillows Rowena had insisted would warm up the space. It was like walking into a museum of their life together. "How long?" His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Dylan is 8 days old." She closed the door softly behind him, leaning against it as if she needed the support. "Born last Tuesday at 3 in the morning. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. Perfectly healthy. Dylan." She had named him Dylan. "That's not what I meant." Keaton turned to face her fully. "How long have you known? How long were you going to keep this from me?" Something flickered across her face. Hurt, maybe, or anger. "Keep it from you? Keaton, you asked for a divorce because you didn't want to be a father. You said you couldn't be the kind of man I needed, the kind of father a child deserved. So I respected that choice. But this is my son." The words came out louder than he intended, and Rowena immediately glanced toward the stairs. "Keep your voice down," she said sharply. "And yes, he's your son, but you made it very clear that wasn't something you wanted." Keaton ran his hands through his hair, destroying the perfect styling. This wasn't how he had imagined this conversation going during the frantic drive over. He had pictured himself being calm, rational, in control. Instead, he felt like he was drowning. "When did you find out?" he asked, quieter this time. Rowena was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. 3 days after you moved out. I was late, and I thought it was just stress from everything we were going through. But when the test came back positive," she shrugged, a gesture that tried to look casual, but didn't quite succeed. "You had already made your decision about us, about children. I wasn't going to trap you with something you didn't want." "Trap me?" Keaton stepped closer and she straightened against the door. "Rowena, this is my child. You should have told me." "Why?" The question came out sharp, cutting. "So you could resent him the way you were starting to resent me? So you could love him in the 15 minutes between phone calls with Tokyo and video conferences with London?" The words hit him like a physical blow. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" Rowena pushed off from the door, walking toward the kitchen. "Keaton, in the last year of our marriage, do you know how many dinners we had together? Do you know how many weekends you spent at home instead of in some conference room or on a plane?" He followed her into the kitchen where she began making coffee with movements that seemed automatic, muscle memory, the same routine she had followed every morning when they were married, except now she was making it for one. "I was building something," he said. "For us. For our future." "No." She turned to face him, and he was startled by the intensity in her eyes. "You were building something for you, your empire, your legacy. I was just there, waiting for you to remember I existed." A soft cry drifted down from upstairs, and Rowena's entire demeanor changed instantly. The tension in her shoulders melted away, replaced by something that looked like peace. "I have to go to him," she said, already moving toward the stairs. "Can I—" Keaton's voice caught. "Can I see him?" Rowena paused at the bottom of the staircase, her hand on the banister. For a moment, he thought she might say no, and maybe he would deserve it. "He's probably hungry," she said finally. "But after that, yes, you can meet your son." As she disappeared up the stairs, Keaton sank onto one of the kitchen stools they had bought at a farmer's market in Pike Place 3 years ago. Rowena had haggled with the vendor for 20 minutes while Keaton checked emails on his phone, barely paying attention to the transaction that had made her so happy. Now, sitting in the kitchen alone, he realized he couldn't remember the last time he had sat still for more than 5 minutes without his phone, without a meeting, without some urgent crisis demanding his attention. From upstairs, he could hear Rowena's voice. soft and musical, talking to Dylan. Not singing exactly, but that gentle stream of consciousness that mothers seem to have with their babies. She was telling him about his day, about the weather, about how the cherry tree in the backyard was starting to bloom. She sounded happy, genuinely peacefully happy in a way she hadn't sounded in the months before their divorce. And for the first time since he had left, Keaton wondered if maybe she was better off without him. 20 minutes passed in the kitchen before Rowena's footsteps descended the stairs. Keaton had spent the time studying the small changes she had made to their home. A new set of coffee mugs with tiny cartoon animals, a stack of parenting books on the counter, a baby monitor with its small screen showing an empty crib. She appeared in the doorway holding a small bundle wrapped in a soft blue blanket. Her hair was pulled back in a fresh ponytail, and she had changed into a clean white t-shirt. There was something different about her posture now, more confident, purposeful. This was her domain. "He just finished eating," she said, her voice softer than it had been during their tense conversation. "He's usually pretty calm after feeding." Keaton stood frozen by the kitchen island, his hands gripping the marble countertop. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals with world leaders, given presentations to rooms full of skeptical investors, built a company from nothing into a global powerhouse. But the thought of holding his own son terrified him. "I don't know how," he admitted quietly. For the first time since he had arrived, Rowena's expression softened completely. "No one knows how at first. Here, sit down." She guided him to the plush sectional sofa in the living room, the same spot where he had watched her through the security camera. The afternoon light streaming through the large windows created a warm, golden atmosphere that seemed to wrap around them. "Support his head," Rowena instructed as she carefully transferred Dylan into Keaton's arms. "Just like that. You're bigger than he's used to, so move slowly." The weight of his son settled against Keaton's chest, and the world shifted on its axis. Dylan was so small, so impossibly fragile, with wisps of dark hair that looked exactly like Keaton's baby pictures. His tiny features were perfect, a button nose, rosebud lips, and when his eyes fluttered open, they were the same steel gray as his father's. "He has your eyes," Rowena said quietly, settling beside them on the sofa. "And your stubborn chin. He makes the same expression you do when you're thinking hard about something." Keaton couldn't speak. Dylan's tiny fist had emerged from the blanket and was grasping at the air before settling against Keaton's forearm. The grip was surprisingly strong, instinctive, and it sent a jolt of something primal through Keaton's chest. "Dylan," he finally managed to say. "Why Dylan?" "Dylan Thomas, the poet." Rowena tucked her legs under herself, watching them both with careful eyes. "Do you remember? We talked about names once, hypothetically. You said if you ever had a son, you might name him after Dylan Thomas because his poetry reminded you of your grandfather." Keaton did remember. It had been during one of their weekend trips to the San Juan Islands, lying on a blanket watching clouds drift across the sky. They had talked about everything and nothing. Dreams, fears, the future they might build together. He had told her about his grandfather, the only family member who had believed in his environmental technology ideas when everyone else thought he was wasting his Stanford MBA on pipe dreams. "You remembered that?" His voice was rough with emotion. "I remembered everything, Keaton." There was no accusation in her tone, just sadness. Every conversation we had about the life we wanted, the house we'd live in, the children we'd raise, the way we'd balance work and family. I remembered all of it while I was sitting in that doctor's office, staring at an ultrasound screen by myself. Dylan made a small sound, something between a sigh and a coo, and both parents immediately focused on him. Keaton found himself naturally adjusting his hold, bringing Dylan slightly higher so he could see his face better. "He's beautiful," Keaton whispered. "He's perfect. He kept me up until 4 this morning," Rowena said, but there was nothing but love in her voice. Apparently he's going to be as demanding as his father. For a moment they just sat together in the golden afternoon light, watching Dylan's peaceful face. It felt like the most natural thing in the world, and also like a miracle Keaton didn't deserve. "I have a nursery upstairs," Rowena said eventually. "I've been working on it since my second trimester. Would you like to see it?" Keaton nodded, carefully standing with Dylan still in his arms. Following Rowena up the stairs felt like stepping into an alternate universe, one where he had been present for the pregnancy, where he had helped paint the walls and assemble the crib, where he had been the partner she needed instead of a stranger who occasionally slept in her bed. The nursery was in what used to be their guest room. The walls were painted a soft sage green with white trim, and there were bookshelves already filled with children's stories. A mobile of tiny airplanes hung over the crib, airplanes that looked suspiciously like the sustainable aviation designs his company had been working on. "You've been following my work," he said, nodding toward the mobile. "Of course I have." Rowena straightened a stuffed elephant on the changing table. "Just because we're not married doesn't mean I stopped caring about your success. I'm proud of what you've built, Keaton. I always was. But not proud enough to stay." The words slipped out before he could stop them, and Rowena turned to face him fully. "I didn't leave because I wasn't proud of you," she said firmly. "I left because I was disappearing. Every day I felt a little more invisible, a little more like a placeholder in your life instead of a partner, and I realized that if I stayed I would start to resent you, and that would have destroyed us both." Dylan stirred in Keaton's arms, making small movements that suggested he might wake up soon. Without thinking, Keaton began to rock gently, the motion feeling surprisingly natural. "I never wanted you to feel invisible," he said softly. "I thought I was protecting our future, making sure we'd never have to worry about money or security." "I know." Rowena's voice was gentle but firm. "But Keaton, I never needed you to be a billionaire. I just needed you to be present. I needed to feel like I mattered more than the next deal." As if responding to their conversation, Dylan opened his eyes and looked directly at Keaton. For a long moment, father and son simply stared at each other, and Keaton felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. This tiny person was part of him, would always be part of him, regardless of what happened between him and Rowena. And for the first time in 7 months, Keaton Wilder knew exactly what his priority should be. Keaton stayed until Dylan's next feeding, then through dinner, then until Rowena started yawning despite her obvious efforts to stay alert. When she finally suggested he should probably head back to his downtown penthouse, it was nearly 10 o'clock, and he felt like he was being asked to leave his own life behind. "Can I come back tomorrow?" The question came out more vulnerable than he intended, like a teenager asking for a second date. Rowena paused in the middle of collecting Dylan's burp cloths from the coffee table. "Keaton, I need to know what this is. Are you here because you feel guilty? Because you think you should be? Or because you actually want to be part of his life?" "I want to be part of his life." The answer came immediately, surprising him with its certainty. "I want to be part of both your lives if you'll let me." "Both our lives?" Rowena straightened, holding the cloths against her chest like a shield. "Keaton, we're divorced. Dylan doesn't change that, doesn't it?" He stood from the sofa, running his hands through his hair. "Rowena, today has been the first day in months that I felt like myself, the real me, not the CEO version or the billionaire version. Just me." She was quiet for a long moment, studying his face in the soft lamplight. Dylan was asleep in his bouncy seat, one tiny fist curled against his cheek, oblivious to the conversation that would shape his entire future. "The man I fell in love with disappeared long before you asked for a divorce," she said finally. "He got buried under stock reports and board meetings and the constant pressure to be bigger, better, more successful. If that man wants to be part of Dylan's life, then yes. But I won't let my son grow up the way I lived those last 2 years, always waiting for someone who's never really there." Keaton felt something crack open in his chest. What if I could change? What if I could find a way to balance it all? "With respect, Keaton, you've been saying that for 3 years. After this deal, things will calm down. Once we get through this quarter, when the company goes public, I'll have more freedom." But there was always another deal, another quarter, another goal that was more important than coming home for dinner. The truth of her words hit him like cold water. How many times had he made those exact promises? How many anniversaries had he missed? How many weekend plans had he canceled? How many conversations had been interrupted by urgent phone calls that could have waited until Monday? "I've been thinking about something all day," he said quietly. "When I got that security alert, I was in the middle of an $800 million negotiation, the biggest deal in my company's history. And you know what I did? I walked out. I left a room full of investors and executives mid-sentence and didn't look back. That's because this was shocking. No." He moved closer to where she stood. "That's because for the first time in years, something mattered more than the deal. You and Dylan mattered more than the deal. And if I can do it once, I can learn to do it again." Rowena set the burp cloths on the side table, her movements careful and deliberate. "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to try. I want to be the father Dylan deserves and the partner you should have had. I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm asking for one anyway." "Partners?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Keaton, we tried that. We had 3 years of marriage to figure it out, and we couldn't make it work. We were different people then. I was different. I thought success meant working harder than everyone else, being available every second, never turning down an opportunity. But today, holding Dylan, watching you with him, I realized I've been measuring success by all the wrong metrics. Dylan stirred in his seat, making soft, sleeping sounds that drew both their attention. Without thinking, Rowena reached over and gently adjusted his blanket, and Keaton watched her hands. The same hands that used to leave encouraging notes in his laptop bag, that used to massage his shoulders after particularly brutal days, that had signed divorce papers 7 months ago because he had failed to appreciate what he had. I've been thinking about metrics too, she said, not looking at him. When I was in labor, pushing for 3 hours in a hospital room by myself, do you know what I kept thinking about? Not that I wished you were there. I had already accepted that you wouldn't be. I kept thinking about what I would tell Dylan when he got older and asked about his father. Keaton's throat tightened. What did you decide to tell him? That his father was a brilliant man who changed the world with clean energy technology, that he built something incredible that would help preserve the planet for future generations, that he was someone to be proud of, even if he wasn't someone who could be present. The words were meant to be generous, but they felt like a knife to his heart. She had already written his epitaph as a father, present in legacy, absent in life. I don't want that to be his story, Keaton said firmly. I don't want him to be proud of what I built if it means he barely knows who I am. I want to teach him to ride a bike and help him with homework and be there when he graduates and gets married and has children of his own. That's a beautiful picture, Keaton. But wanting something and being able to sustain it are two different things. What happens when the company needs you in Singapore for 2 weeks? What happens when there's a crisis that only you can handle? What happens when the next big opportunity comes along and you have to choose between being present for your family and being successful in your career? It was the same argument they had had dozens of times during their marriage, but now it carried the weight of real consequences. Dylan would grow up with or without his father's presence, and that choice was entirely up to Keaton. Then I guess I need to redefine what success looks like, he said. Maybe success isn't being the CEO who never says no. Maybe it's being the father who never misses bedtime. Rowena looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. And if that means your company suffers? If it means losing deals or market share or the respect of your peers? Then that's the price I pay for getting my priorities right. The answer surprised him with its clarity. I spent 5 years building wilder sustainable technologies, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure my son knows that he matters more than any of it. But for the first time since he had arrived, Rowena smiled, not the polite, cautious expression she had been wearing, but something real and hopeful. I want to believe you, she said softly. But Keaton, I can't go through losing you again, and I won't let Dylan go through it either. Then don't think of it as getting me back, he said, stepping closer. Think of it as meeting someone new, someone who finally understands what's worth fighting for. 3 weeks later, Keaton had established a routine that would have been unimaginable during his marriage. Every morning at 7, he arrived at the Mercer Island house with fresh coffee and pastries from Rowena's favorite bakery. He changed Dylan's diaper, gave him his morning bottle while Rowena showered, and spent an hour just talking to his son about everything and nothing. The weather, the stock market, his plans for the day. The business world had noticed his absence. Forbes ran a speculative article titled, "Where is Keaton Wilder?" The Wall Street Journal questioned whether WST's mysterious CEO was having health issues. His stock price had dipped 3%, and his board of directors had started scheduling urgent meetings that he consistently rescheduled. None of it seemed to matter when Dylan wrapped his tiny fingers around Keaton's thumb. "You're getting good at this," Rowena said, watching him expertly swaddle Dylan after a feeding. She was curled up in the corner of the sofa, wearing soft leggings and one of Keaton's old Stanford hoodies that she had apparently kept after the divorce. Her hair was in a messy bun, and there were dark circles under her eyes from the sleepless nights that came with a newborn. But she looked more beautiful to him than she ever had in evening gowns at corporate galas. "I've been practicing," he admitted. "I bought 3 different parenting books and watched about 50 YouTube videos on diaper changing. Keaton Wilder researching parenting techniques," she said with a small smile. "I never thought I'd see the day. There are a lot of things you never thought you'd see." He settled Dylan in his arms, marveling as always at how natural it felt now. At 4 weeks old, Dylan was becoming more alert during his waking hours, his eyes tracking movement and occasionally focusing on faces. "Like me turning down the Singapore expansion meeting yesterday." Rowena's smile faded. "You turned down Singapore? Keaton, that's huge for the company. The Asian market can wait." He looked down at Dylan, who was staring up at him with those serious gray eyes. Thompson can handle the preliminary negotiations. If they need me specifically, we can do video conferences. But I'm not missing 3 weeks of my son's life for any deal. It was then that Keaton's phone started buzzing insistently on the coffee table. He glanced at the screen and saw Margaret's name, along with the urgent tag she reserved for genuine emergencies. "You should take it," Rowena said quietly, but there was something in her tone, a careful neutrality that reminded him of the old days when she had learned to hide her disappointment behind understanding. Keaton picked up the phone but didn't answer it. Instead, he turned it off completely and set it aside. "It can wait," he said firmly. But the phone rang again almost immediately, this time from the house landline that nobody used except for emergencies. Rowena frowned and answered it herself. "Hello? Oh, hi, Margaret. Yes, he's here, but—" She listened for a moment, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "I see. Hold on." She covered the phone with her hand and looked at Keaton. "There's been an explosion at the Portland facility. No one was seriously hurt, but the EPA is threatening to shut down operations pending an investigation. She says if you don't respond within the hour, it could affect all your government contracts. The Portland facility, 200 jobs, $15 million in annual revenue, a cornerstone of his Pacific Northwest operations and the testing ground for his next-generation solar battery technology. If the EPA shut them down, it would take months to get operational approval elsewhere, and by then his competitors would have captured the market share he had spent 3 years building." Dylan made a soft sound, and Keaton looked down at his son, then back at Rowena. She was watching him carefully, and he could see the test in her eyes. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the first real crisis that would reveal whether his promises about priorities were genuine or just pretty words spoken in an emotional moment. "Tell Margaret I'll call her back in 10 minutes, Keaton said finally. Rowena relayed the message and hung up. The silence in the room felt heavy with expectation. "You have to go," she said. It wasn't a question. "No, I don't." Keaton's voice was steady. "I have a competent team. I have lawyers who specialize in EPA regulations. I have a crisis management protocol that doesn't require me to physically be in Portland to activate. Keaton, this could destroy everything you've built." "No." He shifted Dylan to one arm and reached for Rowena's hand with the other. "Leaving my family again would destroy everything I'm trying to build. The company is important, but it's not more important than being here with you and Dylan." Rowena stared at their joined hands. "What if the team can't handle it? What if you lose the contracts and the facility and hundreds of jobs because you weren't there? Then I'll deal with the consequences. But I won't deal with the consequence of my son growing up thinking work matters more than he does." For a long moment they sat in silence. Dylan had fallen asleep in Keaton's arms, his breathing soft and steady. Outside, the afternoon light was starting to fade, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. 3 years ago you would have been on a plane to Portland before Margaret finished explaining the problem, Rowena said softly. 3 years ago I didn't understand what I was giving up every time I got on that plane. Keaton's phone buzzed again. A text this time, then another, then a series of rapid-fire notifications that suggested the crisis was escalating. He didn't look at any of them. "Call your team," Rowena said suddenly. "Set up a video conference, but do it from here." Keaton looked at her in surprise. "You don't mind?" "Mind? Keaton, this is exactly what I always wanted. I wanted to be included in your world, not shut out of it. I wanted to feel like we were partners handling life together, not like I was just the person who happened to live in your house." 20 minutes later, Keaton was set up at the kitchen table with his laptop, connecting to a crisis management call with his legal team, his Portland facility manager, and 2 EPA liaisons. Rowena sat nearby with Dylan, occasionally offering input when Keaton asked for her perspective. She had, after all, worked in administrative support long enough to understand crisis communication protocols. As the meeting progressed, and it became clear that the explosion had been caused by faulty equipment from a subcontractor, rather than any environmental violation by WST, Keaton found himself more focused and decisive than he had been in months. Without the pressure of traveling and the distraction of being away from what mattered most, he could think clearly about solutions. "The EPA is satisfied with our safety protocols," his legal counsel reported as the call wrapped up. "The facility can reopen Monday with enhanced monitoring, and we'll file an insurance claim for the equipment damage." Crisis averted. After he closed the laptop, Rowena looked at him with something that might have been pride. "See," she said, "you didn't have to choose between being a good CEO and being a good father. You just had to choose to do both from the same place. And for the first time since Dylan's birth, Keaton began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could have everything that actually mattered. 2 months had passed since the Portland crisis, and Keaton had successfully managed his company from a careful distance. He had moved his home office to the guest bedroom at Rowena's house, technically still living in his downtown penthouse but spending 18 hours a day on Mercer Island. Dylan was now 2.5 months old, beginning to smile real deliberate smiles that lit up his entire face when he saw his father, and Rowena had started letting Keaton stay for dinner without any awkwardness. They were building something new, not the marriage they'd had before, but something more honest, more sustainable. They were learning to be partners again, to make decisions together, to balance his professional obligations with their growing family, which made the knock on the door at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday evening particularly jarring. Keaton was feeding Dylan his evening bottle, while Rowena folded laundry on the coffee table, a domestic scene that had become so natural, he sometimes forgot they were technically divorced. When the doorbell rang, followed by insistent knocking, they both looked up in surprise. "Are you expecting someone?" Rowena asked, setting down a tiny onesie. "No. You?" She shook her head, moving toward the front window to peek through the curtains. Her posture immediately tensed, and when she turned back to Keaton, her face had gone pale. "It's Vanessa Cromwell, Keaton's business partner, the brilliant and ruthlessly ambitious woman who had helped him secure his first major investment round 4 years ago. She was also his ex-girlfriend from college, someone who had re-entered his life during the shakiest period of his marriage, and had made no secret of her belief that Rowena was holding him back professionally. What does she want? Keaton stood carefully, still holding Dylan, who was contentedly working on his bottle. "I don't know, but she looks upset." Rowena moved away from the window. "You should answer it." The knocking came again, more insistent this time, followed by Vanessa's voice calling through the door. "Keaton, I know you're in there. Your car is in the driveway and we need to talk. Now." Rowena and Keaton exchanged a look. During their marriage, Vanessa had been a source of constant tension, not because of any romantic involvement, but because she represented everything Rowena felt was pulling Keaton away from their relationship. Late-night strategy sessions, weekend conferences, business dinners that stretched until midnight. Vanessa was brilliant, but she was also someone who believed that personal relationships were obstacles to professional success. "I'll handle this," Keaton said, but Rowena was already moving toward the door. "No, I'll get it. This is my house." There was steel in her voice, the same tone she had used during their worst fights about work-life balance. She opened the door to reveal Vanessa in a perfectly tailored burgundy dress and designer heels, her platinum blonde hair styled in a sleek bob. Even at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday, she looked like she had just stepped out of a boardroom. Her pale blue eyes immediately went to Keaton holding the baby, and her expression shifted from frustrated to something closer to shock. "So it's true," she said, stepping into the foyer without being invited. "The rumors about you having a child. I thought surely someone was mistaken or that it was some kind of elaborate cover story for a breakdown." "Vanessa," Keaton's voice was carefully controlled. "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Keaton, you've been MIA for 2 months. You've turned down 3 major acquisition opportunities, declined to attend the Clean Energy Summit in Geneva, and just this week you told the board you won't be available for the investor meetings in New York. Do you have any idea what people are saying about WST's leadership? I imagine they're saying exactly what they always say when someone chooses family over profit margins," Rowena interjected quietly. Vanessa's gaze shifted to her, sharp and assessing. "Rowena, I heard about the divorce. I'm sorry it didn't work out." The words were polite, but there was something underneath them that suggested she wasn't sorry at all. "It's working out fine, actually," Rowena replied evenly. "Is it?" Vanessa looked back at Keaton. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're throwing away everything we've built together for the sake of playing house with your ex-wife and a baby that—" "Careful." Keaton's voice was low, dangerous. Dylan had finished his bottle and was now looking around with the alert curiosity of a 2-month-old who was learning to focus on faces. "Very careful how you finish that sentence." Vanessa seemed to realize she had crossed a line, but she pressed forward anyway. "Keaton, be realistic. You can't run a billion-dollar company from your ex-wife's living room. The board is starting to ask questions about your commitment, and frankly, so am I." "My commitment?" Keaton shifted Dylan to his shoulder, patting his back gently. "Vanessa, WST had its most profitable quarter in company history while I've been playing house. Our environmental impact ratings are at an all-time high, and we just secured the largest renewable energy contract in Washington state history. What exactly am I supposed to be more committed to? To growth, to expansion, to becoming the kind of global leader that changes entire industries. Vanessa's voice rose slightly, her composure cracking. You used to have vision, Keaton. You used to want to revolutionize how the world thinks about sustainable technology. Now you're content to manage from the sidelines while your competitors take market share and the real innovators pass you by. The real innovators? Rowena stepped closer to Keaton, not quite touching him, but making her allegiance clear. Vanessa, he's revolutionized remote leadership, improved company culture, and maintained profitability while being present for his family. That sounds pretty innovative to me. This isn't about innovation, Vanessa said, her mask slipping entirely now. This is about him choosing a smaller life because he's afraid of the bigger one. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Dylan made a soft sound against Keaton's shoulder, and without thinking, Keaton began the gentle swaying motion that had become second nature. You want to know what I'm afraid of? Keaton said quietly. I'm afraid of becoming the kind of person who thinks success is only measured by market cap and industry rankings. I'm afraid of missing my son's first word because I'm in a conference room in Tokyo. I'm afraid of waking up at 65 and realizing I spent my life building something impressive for strangers instead of something meaningful for the people I love. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Vanessa said, frustration clear in her voice. You've lost your edge, you've gotten soft. No, Rowena said firmly. He's gotten smart. He's figured out what actually matters. Vanessa looked between them, something shifting in her expression. I see what this is. You've managed to convince him that this domestic fantasy is what he really wants. But Keaton, you and I both know that 6 months from now, you're going to be climbing the walls. You're going to miss the thrill of the deal, the satisfaction of beating the competition, the rush of building something bigger than yourself. Maybe, Keaton said, but I'll also have been here for 6 months of my son's life. I'll have seen him learn to roll over and sit up and maybe even take his first steps. And that feels like a pretty good trade-off. For the first time since she had arrived, Vanessa looked genuinely uncertain. She stared at Dylan, who had fallen asleep against Keaton's shoulder, and something flickered across her face. Longing, maybe, or regret. You're making a mistake, she said finally, but the conviction had gone out of her voice. The only mistake I made, Keaton replied, was waiting so long to figure out what success actually looks like. After Vanessa left, the house felt eerily quiet. Keaton had put Dylan down in his crib upstairs, and now he and Rowena sat on opposite ends of the sofa, the space between them feeling wider than it had in weeks. She was folding the same baby blanket for the third time, her movements mechanical and distracted. She's not wrong, you know, Rowena said finally, not looking at him. Keaton's stomach dropped. About what? About the company. About your competitors gaining ground while you're here changing diapers and attending pediatrician appointments. She set the blanket down and finally met his eyes. Keaton, I've been watching the industry reports. Tesla just announced a new battery technology that's remarkably similar to what your team was developing 2 years ago. And that German company, Brennan Industries, they secured the contract for the European wind farm project that WST was bidding on. How do you know about Brennan Industries? Because I still care about your success, even if we're not married. Her voice was soft but firm. I get Google alerts for WST news. I read the quarterly reports. I know that your stock price has been stagnant for 3 months while your main competitors have seen 15 to 20% growth. Keaton ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that had become automatic whenever he felt the weight of impossible choices. So what are you saying? That I should go back to being the man who missed your birthday 3 years in a row because of business trips? No. Rowena moved closer to him on the sofa. I'm saying that maybe Vanessa is right about one thing. You can't run a billion-dollar company from my living room indefinitely. Not if you want to keep it competitive. Are you asking me to choose again? Between you and Dylan and the company? I'm asking you to be honest about what's sustainable long-term. She reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. Keaton, these past 2 months have been wonderful. Better than wonderful. I felt like I have my partner back, like we're building something real together. But I also see how you look sometimes when you're on those video calls, when you're managing a crisis from 3,000 miles away. You miss being in the room where decisions are made. The truth of her words hit him harder than he wanted to admit. Just last week, during a crucial negotiation with a potential client in Vancouver, he had felt the frustration of trying to read body language through a laptop screen, of missing the subtle cues that could make or break a deal. He was good at remote management, but he had built his reputation on being the kind of CEO who could walk into any room and command it. "What if I don't want to miss being in this room anymore?" he asked, gesturing around the living space where Dylan's bouncy seat sat next to his laptop, where bottles and business documents shared space on the coffee table. "Then we figure out a different way." Rowena squeezed his hand. "But running from the problem isn't the same as solving it." Before Keaton could respond, his phone started ringing. Margaret again, which probably meant another crisis that required his immediate attention. He had been ignoring most of her calls lately, delegating through email and text, but something about the timing felt ominous. "Take it," Rowena said. "Whatever it is, we'll handle it together." Keaton answered the call, putting it on speaker so Rowena could hear. "Mr. Wilder, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for 2 hours." Margaret's voice was tight with stress. "The board called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. Vanessa convinced them that there needs to be a formal discussion about leadership direction for the company." "What kind of discussion?" "The kind where they ask you to choose between full-time executive presence or transitioning to a chairman role while someone else takes over day-to-day operations." Margaret paused. "Sir, I think they're preparing to ask for your resignation as CEO." The words hung in the air like a physical weight. Rowena's hand tightened in his and he could see the concern in her eyes, but also something else. Resolve. "Who's driving this?" Keaton asked, though he already knew the answer. "Vanessa. She's been making calls to board members all evening, presenting data about market share losses and missed opportunities. She's arguing that WST needs a CEO who can be fully committed to aggressive expansion. And she's volunteering for the position, I assume." "She is." "Sir, what do you want me to tell them?" Keaton looked at Rowena, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Tell them I'll be there tomorrow morning." After he hung up, they sat in silence for several minutes. From upstairs came the soft sound of Dylan stirring in his sleep, that gentle rustling that both parents had learned to distinguish from the cries that meant he needed attention. "So this is it," Rowena said finally. "The moment where you have to decide what kind of life you actually want. It feels like Vanessa is forcing the decision." "No." Rowena turned to face him fully. "Vanessa is just making explicit what was always going to happen eventually. You can't have one foot in each world forever. At some point you have to choose where you want to build your life. And if I choose wrong?" "There is no wrong choice, Keaton. There's only the choice that aligns with who you want to be." She stood up from the sofa, pacing to the window that overlooked the back garden where they had once planned to build a swing set. "But I need you to know that whatever you decide tomorrow, Dylan and I will be okay. We've been okay for 7 months without you, and we can be okay again if that's what it comes to. I don't want you to be okay without me," he said quietly. "I want you to be happy with me. Then fight for that. But fight for it because it's what you genuinely want. Not because you feel guilty or obligated or because you're afraid of what people will think if you choose differently." Upstairs, Dylan began to cry, not the sleepy fussing from a few minutes earlier, but the urgent wail that meant he was hungry or needed changing. Rowena moved toward the stairs automatically, but Keaton caught her hand. "I'll get him," he said. "I want to get him." As he climbed the stairs toward his son's nursery, Keaton realized that the choice had already been made. Not tomorrow in a boardroom full of executives who measured success in quarterly reports and stock prices, but months ago when he had first held Dylan in his arms and understood what it meant to love something more than his own ambition. The question now wasn't what he wanted to choose. The question was whether he had the courage to choose it publicly, in front of people who would never understand why a billionaire would walk away from his empire for the chance to read bedtime stories and teach his son to ride a bike. But as he lifted Dylan from his crib and felt those tiny arms reach for him in the darkness, Keaton knew that some decisions were worth any price. The WST boardroom on the 44th floor had always been Keaton's domain. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of Elliott Bay, and the sleek conference table could seat 20 executives in Italian leather chairs that cost more than most people's cars. He had closed billion-dollar deals in this room, hired and fired executives, and made decisions that affected thousands of jobs across 3 continents. Now, walking into the space he had designed to project absolute power, Keaton felt like a stranger in his own empire. 9 board members were already seated around the table, their expressions ranging from concerned to openly hostile. Vanessa sat at the far end, her posture perfect, a stack of documents arranged precisely in front of her. She had changed from the previous night's burgundy dress into a sharp navy suit that made her look every inch the CEO she clearly intended to become. "Good morning, Keaton," said Richard Hartwell, the board chairman and one of WST's earliest investors. His tone was carefully neutral, but Keaton could read the disappointment in his weathered face. Thank you for making time for this meeting. Of course. Keaton took his usual seat at the head of the table, the position he had occupied for 5 years. Though I have to say, calling an emergency session to discuss my leadership seems a bit dramatic. Is it? This came from Patricia Joe, the venture capitalist who had pushed WST's Series C funding 3 years earlier. Keaton, in the past quarter, you've declined to attend 3 major industry conferences, turned down acquisition opportunities worth over $2 billion, and delegated critical negotiations to subordinates. Meanwhile, our stock price has flatlined while our competitors surge ahead. Our stock price has been stable, Keaton corrected, and our quarterly profits are up 12% from last year. Stable isn't good enough, Vanessa interjected smoothly. Not in our sector. Tesla's energy division grew 28% last quarter. Brennan Industries captured the European contracts we should have won. First Solar just announced a breakthrough in efficiency that leapfrogs our technology by 18 months. She slid a tablet across the table toward him. This is what happens when a company's leadership becomes distracted. Keaton glanced at the data without picking up the tablet. He had seen these numbers already, had spent late nights analyzing market trends and competitor strategies. Vanessa wasn't wrong about the external pressures, but she was fundamentally misunderstanding what success looked like in the long term. You're right, he said, surprising everyone in the room. WST is facing increased competition. The sustainable energy sector is evolving rapidly, and companies that don't adapt will get left behind. But the solution isn't to double down on the same unsustainable leadership model that burns out executives and destroys families. Keaton, Richard said gently, no one is questioning your personal choices. We understand that becoming a father changes a man's priorities. But we have a fiduciary duty to our shareholders, and right now, they're asking hard questions about whether you can provide the kind of focused leadership WST needs to remain competitive. What kind of leadership is that exactly? Keaton stood up, moving to the windows that overlooked the city where he had built his empire. The kind where I'm on a plane 300 days a year? Where I take calls during my son's first Christmas? Where I miss every important moment in my family's life because there's always another deal, another conference, another crisis that only I can handle? The kind where you're present, Vanessa said sharply. Physically present, mentally present, emotionally invested in the success of this company. You built WST from nothing, Keaton. It's your legacy. Are you really willing to let it slide into mediocrity because you've decided to play house with your ex-wife? The words hung in the air like a slap. Several board members shifted uncomfortably, but no one contradicted her characterization. My ex-wife, Keaton said quietly, turning back to face the room, is the woman who believed in WST when it was just an idea in my head and some sketches on a napkin. She's the woman who worked 18-hour days beside me when we couldn't afford to hire employees, who mortgaged her apartment to help fund our first prototype, who sacrificed her own career ambitions so I could chase mine. And yes, she's also the mother of my 3-month-old son, who I refused to treat the way my own father treated me, like an obligation to be managed around business priorities. That's very touching, Patricia said, but sentiment doesn't drive stock prices, doesn't it? Keaton moved back to the table but remained standing. Google has nap pods and on-site childcare. Netflix offers unlimited parental leave. Salesforce just announced a $1 billion investment in employee wellness programs. The most successful companies in the world are figuring out that taking care of your people, including yourself, isn't a luxury. It's a competitive advantage. Those are tech companies with different business models, Richard argued. We're in manufacturing and energy production. We need leaders who can be on-site, who can respond to crises in real time, who can represent us globally. And I can do all of that, Keaton said firmly. Just not the way I used to. I can travel when it's genuinely necessary, rather than because it makes me feel important. I can delegate decisions to qualified team members, rather than micromanaging every detail. I can build a company culture that values results over face time, innovation over exhaustion. Vanessa leaned forward, her pale eyes sharp. And when Brennan Industries offers our biggest client a deal you could have closed with one face-to-face meeting, but instead you lost because you handled it over video conference? What then? Then I learn from it and do better next time. But I don't sacrifice my family for the possibility of preventing every potential business loss. So you're choosing them over WST. It wasn't a question. Keaton looked around the table at the 9 people who had helped him build something extraordinary. They were good people, smart people, who genuinely believed they were doing what was best for the company and its stakeholders. They just couldn't understand that the choice they were asking him to make was a false one. "I'm choosing to be the kind of leader I wish I'd been from the beginning," he said. "Someone who understands that a company is only as strong as the people who run it, and people who sacrifice everything for work eventually have nothing left to give." "That's a lovely philosophy," Vanessa said. "But the market doesn't care about your work-life balance, Epiphany. The market cares about results." "Then let's talk about results." Keaton pulled out his phone and opened the WST Investor app. "Remote leadership has reduced our overhead costs by 15%. Employee satisfaction scores are at an all-time high, which correlates directly with productivity and retention. Customer satisfaction has improved because our team is less stressed and more focused. And innovation is up because people have time to actually think, instead of just react to the next crisis." "Cherry-picked data," Patricia said dismissively. 3-month trend analysis," Keaton corrected. "But if you want to measure success differently, that's your choice. You can vote me out as CEO, install Vanessa or someone else, and go back to the old model of leadership. But understand that you'll be choosing short-term growth over long-term sustainability. You'll be choosing a company culture that treats people as expendable resources rather than human beings with lives outside of work." The room fell silent. Through the windows, Seattle hummed with afternoon activity. Construction cranes building the next generation of office towers, ferries carrying commuters home to their families. The ordinary life of a city that kept moving regardless of what decisions were made in corporate boardrooms. "We need to vote," Richard said finally. "All in favor of accepting Keaton's resignation as CEO?" The words hit Keaton like cold water. He hadn't offered to resign. They were voting to remove him. Vanessa's hand went up immediately. Patricia followed. Then 2 other board members. 5 votes. Not quite a majority, but close enough to make the message clear. "All opposed?" 4 hands rose, including Richard's. "Motion fails," Richard announced. "Keaton, you retain your position as CEO, but understand that this board expects to see concrete improvements in company performance and market position within the next 6 months, or we'll revisit this conversation." As the board members filed out, Vanessa lingered behind. When they were alone, she approached Keaton with an expression that mixed professional disappointment with something more personal. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. "In 5 years, when WST is struggling to compete with companies led by people who weren't afraid to do what it takes to win, you're going to regret choosing the easy path." "The easy path?" Keaton almost laughed. "Vanessa, do you have any idea how hard it is to rebuild a relationship with someone you've hurt? How much work it takes to be present for a child who needs you every single day? How difficult it is to change the way you've operated for your entire adult life?" "But that's just it," she said, her voice softer now. "You shouldn't have to change. You're brilliant at what you do, Keaton. You're a visionary, a natural leader, someone who can see opportunities others miss. And you're throwing all of that away for what? Domestic tranquility?" For a moment, Keaton saw something vulnerable in her expression, a loneliness that all her professional success couldn't quite mask. "I'm not throwing it away," he said gently. "I'm just refusing to let it be the only thing that defines me." As he left the WST building for what might be the last time as its CEO, Keaton felt lighter than he had in months. Not because the board had voted to keep him, but because he had finally said out loud what he valued most. Now he just had to prove he could make it work. Keaton found Rowena in the nursery, sitting in the rocking chair they had bought together 3 years ago but never used. She was feeding Dylan his afternoon bottle, humming a soft melody he remembered her singing during the happiest days of their marriage. The late afternoon light streaming through the windows made her auburn hair glow like fire, and for a moment he just stood in the doorway watching them, his family, the one he had almost lost forever. "How did it go?" she asked without looking up, though he knew she had heard his footsteps on the stairs. "I'm still CEO. Barely." He moved into the room, settling on the floor beside her chair. 5 votes to remove me, 4 to keep me. Richard cast the deciding vote. "And Vanessa?" "Voted against me as expected, but Rowena." He reached up to touch Dylan's tiny hand, which immediately grasped his finger with that instinctive grip that still amazed him. "I realized something in that boardroom. I've been approaching this all wrong." She finally looked down at him, eyebrows raised in question. "I've been trying to prove that I can be the same CEO I always was, just with better boundaries. But that's not what needs to happen. I need to become a completely different kind of leader. the kind who build sustainable success instead of chasing quarterly victories. Dylan had finished his bottle and was making those satisfied baby sounds that meant he was ready for a nap. Rowena lifted him to her shoulder, patting his back gently. What does that look like practically? It looks like restructuring the entire company around remote leadership and distributed decision-making. It looks like promoting people who understand that innovation comes from well-rested minds, not exhausted ones. It looks like making WST a place where having a family isn't seen as a liability, but as an asset that makes you a more complete human being. That's a big gamble, Rowena said softly. What if the board was right? What if companies like yours need the traditional model to stay competitive? Keaton stood and moved to the window, looking out at the back garden where cherry blossoms were beginning to fall like snow. Then we'll find out together, because I'm not going back to being the man who chose work over everything else. I can't, Rowena. I won't survive it, and neither will we. She was quiet for a long moment, rocking gently as Dylan settled into sleep against her shoulder. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Keaton, I need to tell you something about why I really didn't tell you about the pregnancy. He turned from the window, something in her tone making his chest tighten. It wasn't just because I thought you didn't want children. It was because I was terrified that if you knew, you'd try to do the right thing. You'd try to be present and involved, but you'd resent Dylan and me for taking you away from the life you really wanted. And I couldn't bear the thought of watching you slowly grow to hate us. The words hit him like a physical blow. Rowena, I could never. I know that now, she interrupted gently. I know that because I've watched you these past few months. I've seen how you look at him, how naturally you've taken to being his father. But at the time, when I was scared and alone and still healing from the divorce, I convinced myself that protecting you from an obligation was the same as protecting all of us from heartbreak. Keaton moved back to her, kneeling beside the rocking chair. You were protecting yourself too, from having to watch me fail again. Maybe, she smiled sadly, but I also robbed you of the chance to surprise me, to surprise both of us. Dylan had fallen completely asleep, his tiny face peaceful and perfect against Rowena's shoulder. Without speaking, she stood and moved to his crib, laying him down with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing this alone for 3 months. Keaton watched her every movement, struck by how natural she looked as a mother, how right this all felt when they were together. I have something to ask you, he said as she adjusted Dylan's blanket. Something that might sound crazy. Crazier than restructuring a billion-dollar company around work-life balance? Much crazier. He took a deep breath. Marry me. Again. Rowena's hand stilled on the blanket. Keaton, I know how it sounds. I know we just got divorced 7 months ago, and I know I have no right to ask you to trust me again. But Rowena, these past few months have shown me what our marriage could have been if I had understood what really mattered. You, Dylan, the life we build together, that's my success story, not the stock price or the magazine covers or the respect of people who measure worth in quarterly earnings. She turned to face him, tears visible in her eyes. What if you change your mind? What if 6 months from now you miss the adrenaline rush of closing billion-dollar deals and traveling the world? What if this domestic life starts to feel small compared to the empire you're giving up? Then I'll remember this moment, he said, moving closer to her. I'll remember holding our son for the first time and feeling like I finally understood what I was put on this earth to do. I'll remember the way you looked at me when I chose to stay home during the Portland crisis, like you were proud of who I was becoming. I'll remember that the biggest deal I ever closed was convincing you to give me another chance. I never said I was giving you another chance. No, he admitted. But you let me stay. You let me be part of Dylan's life. You included me in decisions and trusted me with feelings and made space for me in this house we used to share. That's not nothing, Rowena. She was quiet for a long time, looking down at their sleeping son. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but careful. If we do this, if we try again, it has to be different. Not just your priorities, but the way we communicate, the way we make decisions, the way we handle conflict. I won't go back to being the wife who smiles and supports while slowly disappearing inside. I don't want that wife, Keaton said firmly. I want the partner who challenges my assumptions and calls me out when I'm being an idiot. I want the woman who's smart enough to run her own company but chose to help me build mine. I want the mother of my children who's strong enough to raise them alone but generous enough to let me learn how to be the father they deserve. Children? Rowena raised an eyebrow. Plural. I'm hoping, he said with a smile that felt like the first genuine one he'd managed in months. I figure Dylan's going to need someone to boss around, and I'd like to give him at least one sibling who shares his opinion of bedtime stories. For the first time since he had arrived that afternoon, Rowena laughed. The real laugh that had first made him fall in love with her in a crowded coffee shop 5 years ago. You're assuming I'll say yes. I'm hoping, he repeated. But Rowena, even if you're not ready for marriage again, I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I'll be here for Dylan, for you, for whatever version of family you're comfortable building. I'll prove that I've changed, not with words, but with presence. Not with promises, but with showing up every single day. She moved to the window, looking out at the garden where they had once planned to build a swing set. Ask me again in 6 months, she said finally. After you've proven to yourself and the board that your new approach to leadership actually works. After you've survived the sleepless nights and teething and all the ordinary challenges of being a full-time parent. Ask me when you're sure this isn't just guilt or novelty or the fear of being alone. And if I ask you in 6 months, she turned back to him, and he saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there during their marriage. Hope tempered by wisdom, love strengthened by experience. Then I'll give you an answer that's not based on fear, she said. An answer that's based on who we've both become and who we want to be together. As they stood together in their son's nursery, watching Dylan sleep in the golden afternoon light, Keaton realized that this was what he had been working toward all along without knowing it. Not the perfect ending, but the honest beginning. Not the guarantee of success, but the promise of presence. And for the first time in his adult life, that felt like more than enough. 6 months later, the October morning was crisp and golden, the kind of Pacific Northwest autumn day that made Seattle feel like the most beautiful city in the world. Keaton sat on the back deck of the Mercer Island house, laptop balanced on his knees, participating in a video conference with the WST team in Germany, while Dylan napped in his carrier beside him. 8 months old now, Dylan had his father's steel gray eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. He was sitting up on his own, babbling constantly, and had recently discovered the joy of throwing everything within reach onto the floor. Keaton had learned to conduct business calls while simultaneously retrieving toys, and somehow, this had made him a more effective communicator, not less. The Berlin facility is exceeding efficiency projections by 12%. Klaus, his German operations manager, was reporting through the laptop screen. The new wellness protocols you implemented have reduced sick days by 30% and increased innovation metrics across all departments. Excellent work, Klaus. How's the employee satisfaction survey looking? Highest scores in company history. The flexible scheduling and remote work options have been particularly popular with our team members who have young children. Keaton smiled, glancing down at Dylan, who was chewing thoughtfully on a teething ring. Turns out people work better when they don't have to choose between their careers and their families. After ending the call, Keaton closed the laptop and lifted Dylan from his carrier. The baby immediately reached for his father's hair, which had grown longer and less perfectly styled in recent months. Rowena said it made him look younger, more approachable. The business press had initially speculated that his more casual appearance signaled a lack of focus, but WST's continued growth had quieted most of the critics. Not all of them, of course. Vanessa had left the company 4 months ago to start her own sustainable energy firm, taking 2 other executives with her. She had been quoted in Forbes saying that Keaton's lifestyle experiment would ultimately prove unsustainable in a competitive global market. Her new company had secured some impressive initial contracts, and the business media was watching eagerly to see which approach would prove more successful long-term. Keaton honestly wished her well. He understood now that Vanessa's drive came from the same place his had, a deep fear that slowing down meant falling behind, that showing weakness meant losing everything. He hoped she would find her own version of balance before it cost her the things that actually mattered. The sliding door opened behind him, and Rowena emerged carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing one of his old WST hoodies over leggings. She had started working part-time for a nonprofit that helped women transition back into the workforce after having children, and she seemed happier and more energized than she had in years. "How was the Berlin call?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him. "Good. Klaus wants to implement the family leave policies we piloted here across all the European operations." Keaton shifted Dylan to one arm so he could accept the coffee. "And I got an interesting call from Richard this morning." "Oh?" WST's stock price hit an all-time high yesterday. Apparently investors are responding positively to our new leadership model. They're calling it sustainable capitalism. The idea that companies perform better when they treat employees as complete human beings rather than just productivity units. Rowena raised an eyebrow. So your radical experiment in work-life balance is making money? Lots of money. Richard said 3 other Fortune 500 companies have reached out asking to consult on implementing similar policies. Keaton laughed, bouncing Dylan gently as the baby started to fuss. Who would have thought that revolutionary business strategy would involve spending time with your family? Anyone who's ever actually had a family, Rowena said dryly. But I'm glad the rest of the business world is catching up. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the autumn light filter through the trees they had planted together during their marriage. The garden looked different now, less formally landscaped, more lived in. There was a small swing hanging from the old oak tree, and colorful toys scattered across the grass from Dylan's morning playtime. I have something to tell you, Rowena said eventually, and something in her tone made Keaton look at her more closely. Good something or bad something? Good something, I think. She smiled, but there was nervousness in her expression. I got a call from Stanford yesterday. They want me to apply for a position in their new sustainable business program. It would mean teaching graduate students about integrating environmental and social responsibility into corporate strategy. Rowena, that's incredible. That's exactly the kind of work you've always wanted to do. It would also mean going back to school part-time to finish my MBA, and it's in Palo Alto, which means we'd have to move. Keaton felt a flicker of the old panic, the fear of change, of disruption to carefully constructed plans. But then Dylan grabbed his nose and made a delighted gurgling sound, and he remembered that the best parts of his life had come from unexpected changes. When would you start? Next fall. If I get accepted. If I decide to apply. She was studying his face carefully. Keaton, I don't want to assume anything about us, about our future. We're not married, we're not even officially back together. I don't know if you'd want to uproot your life for my career. Are you kidding? Keaton shifted Dylan to his other arm, reaching for Rowena's hand. Do you know how proud I am of you? How incredible it makes me feel to know that my son's mother is the kind of woman who gets recruited by Stanford to teach the next generation of business leaders. But your company can be run from anywhere with good internet and an airport. In fact, Silicon Valley might be the perfect place to expand our West Coast operations. He squeezed her hand. Besides, I seem to remember promising you that I'd support your dreams this time around, not just expect you to support mine. Tears appeared in Rowena's eyes. You really wouldn't mind? Mind? Rowena, I'd be honored to follow you to your next adventure. Dylan chose that moment to reach for his mother, making the demanding sounds that meant he wanted attention from both parents simultaneously. As Rowena took him and settled him between them on her lap, Keaton marveled at how natural this felt. The 3 of them together, making plans, building a future that included everyone's dreams. There's something else, Rowena said, her voice softer now. You asked me something 6 months ago about trying again, about building something new together. Keaton's heart rate picked up. I remember. I've been thinking about it. About us. About what we've built these past 9 months. She looked down at Dylan, who was contentedly chewing on her finger. You've kept every promise you made. You've been present for every doctor's appointment, every sleepless night, every milestone. You've shown me that you can be successful without sacrificing your family. And... She met his eyes and he saw the same love there that had first captivated him 5 years ago, but deeper now, tested and strengthened by everything they had survived together. And I think it's time to stop being afraid of our own happiness. Keaton felt his throat tighten with emotion. Is that a yes? That's a yes to trying again. A yes to building something that includes both our dreams. A yes to believing that we can be better together than we ever were apart. She smiled, the radiant expression that had been missing for so long during their marriage. But I have one condition. Anything. This time I want a real wedding. Not some courthouse ceremony between business trips. I want Dylan to be our ring bearer, and I want a reception where we actually get to dance together instead of you networking with potential clients. Keaton laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. I think I can manage that. As if sensing the significance of the moment, Dylan looked up at both his parents and gave them his biggest smile yet. The kind of pure, uncomplicated joy that reminded them why they had fought so hard to get to this moment. Later that evening, after Dylan was asleep and they had spent hours making plans for Stanford and the move and the wedding, Keaton found himself standing in the nursery doorway watching his son sleep. The mobile of tiny airplanes turned slowly in the gentle breeze from the open window, casting moving shadows on the walls they had painted together. 6 months ago, he had been a man who measured success in stock prices and market share. Now he measured it in baby laughs and quiet family dinners and the feeling of coming home to people who loved him, not for what he accomplished, but for who he was when all the accomplishments were stripped away. His phone buzzed with a notification from the WST Investor app. Quarterly reports were up, stock prices were climbing, and his sustainable leadership model was being studied by business schools across the country. He glanced at the numbers, felt a moment of satisfaction, and then put the phone away without checking his email. Those reports would still be there tomorrow. Tonight, he had everything he needed right here in this house. In this life he had almost thrown away in pursuit of things that ultimately mattered far less than the love of the woman sleeping in their bed, and the trust of the son breathing peacefully in his crib. Keaton Wilder had finally learned the difference between being successful and being significant, and he had never been happier to be wrong about what mattered most. What would you have done in Keaton's situation? Chosen the empire you built or the family you found? Sometimes the greatest success comes not from what we achieve, but from what we're willing to change for love. Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below, letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.